You weren't educated, you were domesticated, you weren't prepared to lead. You were conditioned to follow. From the moment you sat at your first school desk, the system began its work, not to awaken you, but to suppress you. You were rewarded for silence, punished for curiosity. When you raised your hand, they told you when to speak. When you stood up, they told you when to sit back down. They measured your worth in grades, not in courage. In attendance, not in awareness. They praised obedience, not insight. Memorization, not understanding, because they weren't teaching you how to think. They were teaching you how to behave. And well-behaved men rarely build empires. You grew up chasing approval. From teachers, from parents, from society. You learned to fear being wrong more than being average. You were trained to avoid failure, not to seek truth. And so you became safe, predictable, harmless. They made you afraid of risk and addicted to certainty. That's why you beg for job security instead of building your own wealth. That's why you stay silent in meetings, nodding to things you disagree with. That's why you wake up each morning with a quiet voice screaming inside your chest, because something doesn't feel right, and you know it. But you've spent so long being trained to obey that you question your instincts. You ask for permission to live in a world built by those who never did. You were taught to be a cog in someone else's machine, not to build your own. They gave you a script. Go to school, get a degree, find a job, obey your boss. Retire when you're too old to live. That's not a life, that's a leash. A golden one maybe, decorated with benefits and weekends, but a leash nonetheless. You were never told how money works, only how to work for money. You were never told how wealth is built, only how debt is normalized. You were never told that time is your greatest asset, only how to trade it for a paycheck. Because they don't want you wealthy, they want you dependent. The system doesn't need free thinkers, it needs loyal workers. It needs you to believe that comfort equals success, that buying things you don't need is the reward for sacrificing your soul. But deep down, you feel the hunger, not for food, for freedom. You feel it when you look at the clock and wish it would move faster. You feel it when Sunday night arrives and your chest tightens. You feel it when you watch others live while you exist. That ache inside you? It's not depression, it's your soul rejecting captivity. They told you that ambition is selfish, that wanting more is greed. But what's greedy about wanting time with your children? What's selfish about buying back your life? You were programmed to feel guilty for desiring freedom. So they sold you distractions, sports, gossip, scrolling, to keep you numb. And while you consumed, they accumulated. While you obeyed, they owned. The wealthy aren't smarter than you, they're just unchained. They saw through the illusion and refused to kneel. You can feel it, can't you? That quiet rage rising in your chest? The realization that you were lied to, with a smile. But this isn't your fault, it's your responsibility. Because now that you've seen it, you can never unsee it. The walls were invisible. That's why they worked. You weren't in chains, but in routines. You weren't in prison, but in comfort zones dressed as success. Wake, commute, obey, repeat. You called it normal life, but it was quiet submission. Obedience was praised. Independence was punished. You noticed it early, when you questioned a rule and the teacher got defensive. When you had a different opinion and they called you difficult. They didn't want brilliance. They wanted compliance. So you dimmed your fire, lowered your voice, played small. But the fire never died. It just burned in silence. You feel it when someone talks about financial freedom and something in your chest tightens. Not because it's a lie, but because you've been told it's not for people like you. They trained you to associate money with evil. They made you believe poverty is virtuous. But poverty isn't humility, it's limitation. Limitation on how much time you can spend with your children. Limitation on how many choices you can make without begging. Limitation on how loud your voice can be in a room full of powerful men. Wealth isn't greed, it's options. Options to say no. Options to walk away. Options to build your own. But you were trained to fear options, to wait for instructions. So you don't start a business. You don't invest. You don't speak your mind. You wait for permission. But the life you want doesn't come with permission slips. It comes with rebellion, with strategy, with silence and execution. That's how they did it. The ones who broke out. They stopped explaining themselves and started building. They stopped seeking approval and started seeking leverage. Leverage is the real currency. Not time, not effort, but positioning. You were taught to trade hours for dollars, but the wealthy trade decisions for decades. They buy time, they buy peace, they buy invisibility. While you hustle for likes, they move in silence. They don't beg for raises, they print value. And here's the truth no one told you. You can too. But first you must unlearn. Unlearn that comfort equals happiness. Unlearn that debt is normal. Unlearn that silence keeps you safe, because silence only keeps you small. You were trained to tolerate discomfort, as long as it served others, to clock in with a smile, to swallow your dreams, to retire when it's too late. You call it being responsible, but it's a slow spiritual decay. You were made for more than this. You know it. You've always known. But knowing is not enough. You must rewire. Rewire your beliefs about wealth, about worth, about work. Work is not noble if it enslaves you. Humility is not a virtue if it keeps you broke. And obedience is not morality if it keeps you in chains. They made obedience feel like safety. But safety isn't freedom. It's just a quieter form of fear. You followed their instructions for years. But where did they lead you? You gave them your energy, your best hours, your belief, and in return, they gave you stability, a paycheck that disappears before the 15th, a title that means nothing outside the office. You traded your fire for a seat at a table that never feeds you. And they convinced you that's success. They said, at least you have a job. At least you're surviving. But you weren't born to survive. You were born to dominate. The cage is clean, but it's still a cage. You wear clothes you didn't choose, work under lights you didn't install, build dreams that aren't yours. And yet, every now and then, something cracks. A conversation, a book, a video like this, something breaks through the programming, and the illusion trembles. That tremble you feel right now? That's the real you waking up. The part of you that remembers who you were before they trained you, before you were told to be quiet, to be small, to be reasonable. You weren't always like this. You used to dream loudly, but they beat that voice out of you with shame, guilt, and mockery. Now you're learning to speak again, and not in words, but in actions. Every time you say no, every time you choose growth over comfort, every time you invest in yourself, you're rewriting the script. You're replacing obedience with clarity, fear with focus, hope with strategy, because hope alone won't free you. You need execution. The system trained you to consume, but you will train yourself to create. They taught you to follow, but you will learn to lead, even if it's only yourself at first. They want noise. You will give them silence. They want distraction. You will give them discipline. Because discipline is rebellion in a world that glorifies weakness. You won't be saved by motivation. You'll be saved by consistency. This isn't about rage. It's about resolve. They expect you to complain. They don't expect you to rise. That's your advantage. Silence is louder than noise when it moves with intent. So move quietly, deliberately, relentlessly. Invest in skills, not status. Build income, not appearances. Own your time. Don't rent your life. The people you admire didn't follow the script. They rewrote it, one risk at a time, one mindset shift at a time. You don't need their permission. You need a plan. The first rule of that plan: never be comfortable in a system designed to keep you small. Second, respect your time more than others respect your feelings. Third, build something no one can take from you. Not a car, not a house, a mind, a mission, a machine of value. Because money isn't the goal. Freedom is. And freedom is earned, not granted. You were trained to wait for it. Now, you will train yourself to take it, quietly, smartly, ruthlessly. This world rewards men who build, not men who obey. It's not about becoming loud. It's about becoming unignorable. Because the moment you become self-reliant, you become untouchable. You no longer panic at prices. You no longer chase approval. You no longer fear being alone. You walk differently when you own your life. But ownership starts in the mind. And yours has been rented out for years, to teachers who didn't care, to bosses who didn't see you, to systems that didn't serve you. You gave them your thoughts, your hopes, your energy. Now it's time to take them back. And don't expect applause when you do. They will call you selfish, delusional, cold. But that's what they say when obedience stops working. When you stop serving their comfort and start serving your own truth. Because comfort is not kindness. It's often control dressed in affection. They said, be humble. But what they meant was, stay small. They said, don't change, because they feared your growth would expose their stagnation. But this isn't about them. It's about the boy inside you who was once wild, fearless, curious. He still lives in you, but he's starving. Not for food, for freedom, for movement, for danger, for challenge. That boy didn't dream of retirement plans. He dreamed of conquering, and maybe somewhere along the way, you forgot. But your bones remember. Your blood remembers. Every time you feel that pull, that discomfort in stillness, that's your nature resisting the leash, because the leash might be invisible, but the bruise it leaves on your soul is real. You weren't born to fit in rows. to color inside lines, to stand in silence. You were born to build, to hunt, to lead, to protect, to expand. But first you must destroy. Destroy the idea that wealth is evil, that ambition is arrogance, that power is wrong. There is nothing noble about hiding your fire. There is nothing ethical about being weak. Weak men don't make the world better. They just become tools for stronger ones. And the world is full of wolves waiting for obedient sheep. You were trained to be the sheep. Now it's time to become the storm, not through anger, but through clarity, not through noise, but through control. You don't need to announce your rebellion. You just need to act like a man who owns himself. That look in your eye when you walk into a room, it should say, I don't need to be liked. I'm here on a mission. Because you are. You're here to reclaim your life. One decision at a time, $1 at a time, one morning at a time. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. And slowly, the system will lose its grip on you. You'll stop flinching at opinions. You'll stop waiting for weekends. You'll stop asking for things you can take. And that's when you become dangerous. Not because you hurt others, but because you can't be controlled anymore. That's real power. Unspoken, unshaken, unapologetic. The world fears that version of you because they trained you to be obedient, but you chose to become wealthy, in mind, in discipline, in truth. If this message is resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps this content reach those who need it most. Now, let's get back to it. And that kind of wealth, it doesn't come from salary. It comes from knowing you don't owe anyone your silence. It comes from waking up with a plan that doesn't depend on permission. It comes from finally realizing you were never supposed to fit in. They trained you to believe that blending in was survival, but standing out is how you rise. No king ever built a throne by being agreeable. No empire was built by following instructions. Empires are built by those who disobeyed quietly, then delivered results loudly. You won't need to scream. You'll just execute. Because once you see the code, you stop reacting to noise. You stop chasing likes and applause. You build silently and let your life speak. The world trained you to be a consumer, but your nature is to be a creator. The proof is in how alive you feel when you make something, anything that's yours. A project, a skill, an idea no one else can claim. In those moments, you remember what it feels like to own yourself. That's not ego, that's truth. Because a man who doesn't build something of his own will always be rented by another. And you weren't born to be rented. You were born to design a life where your time is yours, where your decisions echo beyond paychecks. But this requires a kind of courage that looks quiet on the outside and absolute on the inside. You won't find it in comfort. You'll find it in discomfort you choose. Waking up earlier than your peers, saying no when others say yes, studying when others scroll. That's rebellion now. That's resistance. Because the new war isn't fought with weapons, it's fought with discipline. You win not by arguing, but by outlasting. You don't need to convince anyone. You just need to become undeniable. Every habit you adopt becomes armor. Every excuse you destroy becomes fuel. And one day, without even noticing, you'll look around and realize you've built something real. Freedom that can't be revoked. Confidence that isn't borrowed. Power that isn't fake. Not everyone will understand it. And that's okay. They weren't trained like you, but they also didn't break out like you. You'll lose some people, but you'll gain yourself, and that trade is always worth it. Because the world doesn't need more obedient men. It needs dangerous thinkers, quiet builders, strategic rebels, men who know that comfort is a cage, and wealth is a weapon, when used with honor. You don't need to wait 10 years. You just need to start now. Start by questioning, then by learning, then by executing. They trained you to freeze when unsure, but now you'll move even when uncertain, because action breaks chains, and hesitation builds them. You can't obey your way to freedom. You must earn it, in silence, in discomfort, in clarity. And when you do, they'll feel it, even if they don't know what changed. Because you won't speak louder. You'll move differently. Not louder, just more grounded, more focused, more still. Because real power doesn't scream, it radiates. And when you start moving like that, people notice. Even if they don't know why, something in your energy shifts. You stop asking, you start choosing, you stop apologizing for wanting more. And when the world sees a man who no longer needs validation, it calls him dangerous. But the truth is, you're not dangerous to others. You're only dangerous to the system that depended on your submission. You're dangerous to mediocrity, to passivity, to excuses. You become living proof that the script is optional. And that truth is contagious. Other men will watch you, silently, carefully. They'll see the discipline, the decisions, the quiet transformation. And something in them will shift too, Because we don't inspire others by preaching. We do it by changing, by becoming a mirror that reflects what they've been afraid to face. Your silence becomes language. Your routine becomes rebellion. Your results become permission. And when they ask how you did it, you won't give them a list. You'll give them a look. Because it wasn't just one thing. It was all the invisible things. Waking up when it hurt. Working when no one clapped. Choosing clarity over comfort. You were trained to need witnesses, but now you train alone. You were trained to fear boredom, but now you crave silence. You were trained to wait for perfect timing, but now you act, even with doubt. And this shift, it multiplies. Soon your finances follow, then your energy, then your posture, then your identity. You no longer introduce yourself by your job title. You let your presence speak, because you've stopped selling your soul for social points. You've remembered who you are beneath the programming. Not a follower, not a victim, not a cog, but a force. A man who thinks before he reacts, speaks with intention, moves with strategy. That version of you was buried, not broken. And now that you've dug him out, you protect him, not with pride, but with purpose. Because the world will try to drag you back. It'll offer old comforts, old titles, old lies. But you've tasted something stronger now. The flavor of freedom, of ownership, of walking through the world awake. And once you've tasted it, you don't go back to sleep. You see the distractions for what they are. You see the noise for what it hides. And most importantly, you see yourself finally, without distortion. The man who was always there, under the layers, under the fear. Not perfect, but clear. Not the loudest, but the most unshakable in the room. Because wealth isn't always what's in your pocket. It's what's in your posture, your time, your peace. And they trained you to give those things away cheaply. But you've stopped selling. You've started building, thinking, moving. Not because someone told you to, but because you finally remembered. You were trained to be obedient, but you were born to be free. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in silence. But you feel it in the way you stop rushing, in the way you breathe deeper, in the way your choices feel intentional. You no longer move to impress. You move to align, and that shift changes everything. Money flows differently because it's no longer your master, it's your tool. People treat you differently because they sense you're not for sale. You treat yourself differently because you've earned your own respect. That's real wealth, unseen, unshakable. You won't need to flaunt it. It lives in your presence, in your schedule, in your standards, in the boundaries you no longer have to explain. And the more you honor it, the more the noise fades. You stop arguing with the system. You outgrow it. You stop begging for fairness. You create your own leverage. You stop proving yourself. You just become undeniable. And as the noise fades, something else grows louder. Your voice, not the one they gave you, but the one that's always been yours. It's not angry. It's not desperate. It's clear, sharp, decisive. And when you speak from that place, people listen. Not because you shout, but because your words carry weight. They're backed by action, by ownership, by a man who doesn't flinch when challenged. You've stepped out of the echo chamber. You no longer wait to be told what matters. You decide. You define your values, your rhythm, your direction. You take less, but build more. You speak less, but say more. That's the paradox of power. It looks quiet until it moves. And when it moves, it shifts everything. Not overnight, not with fanfare, but with consistency that compounds. You wake up with clarity. You work with conviction. You rest with purpose. Not because you checked all the boxes, but because you burned the old checklist and wrote your own. You no longer fear starting over. You welcome it because you understand now you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience, from awareness, from wisdom they never intended for you to have, but you took it anyway. Piece by piece, book by book, sacrifice by sacrifice. And now you own something they can't take. Your mind, your direction, your silence. They trained you to obey, to be safe, to stay in line. But you stepped off the path, into the unknown, into the fire, and you emerged forged, not burned. This version of you, he doesn't flinch at rejection. He doesn't fold under pressure. He doesn't wait to be chosen. He chooses himself. Because he remembers now, they trained him to be obedient. But he was born to be something else entirely. A builder, a leader, a quiet threat to everything fake. So don't look back. Don't explain your rise. Don't shrink for comfort. Rise slowly. Sharpen quietly. Strike intentionally. The world will try to pull you back into its sleep. But you've awakened, and once a man wakes up, the system loses its grip. You were trained to be obedient, not wealthy, but obedience was never your nature. And wealth was never just about money. It was about owning yourself. And now, you do.